We have 5 stories in total for you guys today. The first story is posted by you/Wibbly Wobbly. A bar near me found a hilarious loophole to get around noise complaints and keep hosting live music. A bar in my town used to host live bands all the time, until one of the neighbors complained about the noise. It turns out, the zoning rules didn't allow them to have live music, and they almost got shut down. The bar owner read over said zoning rules, and notices that the wording forbade them to have live music indoors. But they could have it outdoors, so they moved the stage to the patio section, where it would be even louder for the neighbors, and still be legal. They still have live music sometimes, but not nearly as often as they used to. Don't want to push their luck, I guess. On to the second story written by you/Kimchi Katie. You've been randomly selected. This happened about 3 years ago, while going through an airport in the US. I walked through the metal detector. Something must have beeped, and they needed to pat me down. After a thorough pat down, I put my shoes on and started to walk over to grab my bag. A TSA agent stops me and says, "You've been randomly selected. Please step into the body scanner." I was polite, but said that I really didn't want to get into the body scanner, and asked if there was another way. The agent said that I could get a pat down. I said, "Well, I just got a pat down, so." They angrily told me to pick an option. So I took 2 steps backwards to the woman who had patted me down 30 seconds ago and spread M. Again, while she was patting me down, I asked her if she found anything new. She stared daggers at me, but let me go. On to the third story shared by you/NYJibs. Tenant asking landlord to be more professional. I am a small-time landlord with just for tenants. Earlier this year, I had 2 sisters that didn't respond to my requests to add the gal's husband to the lease, though he was living with them. Not a big deal, but did I mention the pit bull they also brought home without permission? I do allow pets and had previously approved their other dog. I asked nicely in person and by email in the months leading up to the malicious compliance. They also did not respond when I asked if they were happy there and wanted to renew their lease for the following year. I asked again. Then I emailed them notice that I would start showing the unit 2 days later. I try to be a nice landlord. I do. They had a newborn as well, so I scheduled all of the showings within a 2-hour window on the same night, so I could be in their space as little as possible. Also, because they had not responded, and it was now serious crunch time for getting another tenant. And my spouse worked all the following 2 weeks. During evening showing hours, I had the delightful inconvenience of bringing my 2- and 6-year-old children with me to the showings. Because I'm not a corporation, I'm a small-time family landlord with kids. Try to imagine how difficult it is to conduct business meetings with 2 kids, right? Then imagine staggering showings every 15 minutes with prospective tenants who are also bringing their own kids. Just to further clutter your imagination, this is an 800 square foot 2-bedroom apartment with a cozy entryway. So I arrive with my 2 kids to find that my tenants are still at home, along with the husband, the newborn, and the other sister's boyfriend. So that's 7 people in a small kitchen already. Then the first prospective tenants start arriving. Husbands, wives with kids, and some showing up early, so there's 2 sets of them. That's 14 people in a small kitchen. And I'm a mom. I have magical powers. So I'm holding my toddler. My daughter is safely under the dining table coloring. And I'm chatting with the prospective tenants and directing traffic while my actual tenants prepare to depart. If you didn't know this already, it's common practice in the US to leave the premises during real estate or apartment showings. This was their first apartment, so I actually emailed them ahead of time to let them know what is generally expected at showings. They do eventually leave after the boyfriend tells a prospective tenant that he, in fact, also lives there. And I carry on with an exhausting scheduling of showings and have my new tenants all picked out and lease signed by the next day. Awesome, right? The next night, I get a voicemail from the husband. I saved it and just listened to it again because it still gives me that same delightful shiver of malicious compliance. In his voicemail, he told me how awful it was that my children touched his infant's things and how they had to sterilize everything to keep their infant from being sick, and how inconvenient it was to have showings with only 2 days' notice, and how very unprofessional I was to bring my children, and asked if I could just be more professional in the future. You can hear it, can't you? The deep shiver of malicious compliance vibrating through my offended being. The next morning, I started issuing professional lease violation notices. One for the extra residents of the unit, one for the extra dog, and a few additional ones for building concerns I noted during the showings. They ignored the violation notice, which I sent by certified mail and thoughtfully. Also by email, I decided to be even more professional 30 days later and issue a 5-day notice to vacate. And I called their mom, who is their emergency contact, as an eviction notice is an emergency. Did I mention that their lease was due to end just a few weeks later, but it would be unprofessional of me to let these violations slide until then. 3 days later, they'd magically sent me all the information I'd requested. Removed the other dog, licensed the first dog, gotten the required pet insurance. They moved out on their lease termination date, and skipped out on their last electric bill, and left the unit in damaged condition. Despite my professional security deposit, disposition statement, and request for payment, they ignored those notices. Until I stated I would proceed to small claims court by X date for the total due beyond their security deposit. On X date, they replied stating they didn't think it was fair, that they should have to cover damages to the unit, or pay any more money toward their utility bill. Yep, 2 months later, they were in the lobby of the courthouse, sitting across from each other on uncomfortable waiting room benches. They're laughing among themselves about how they're going to get their full security deposit back, and I'm quietly reviewing my presentation notes to the judge and my sizable stack of evidence. Photographs, videos. This was my first time in court, but I wasn't laughing. Oh no, I was preparing. 1 hour later, we're back in the lobby, and their mom is trying to write me a check for the full amount of the judgment. She doesn't have a pen. Her kids don't have a pen. I, however, have a pen. I cheerfully offer my pen. She writes the check and hands it to me, and, wait, I hold out my hand again. Got my pen back too. I was so proud of myself for not saying any of the sassy things in my head in that moment. You know why? Because I was being professional, as I'd been from the moment he'd left that voicemail. As a last note, I do acknowledge that it would have been better if I hadn't brought my children. However, if you have kids, you'll understand that sometimes they simply have to go where you go. On to the 4th story. Neighbor tells Gramps he should mind his own darn business. That advice costs neighbor most of his yard and a car. Gramps had just moved into a retirement park with a lot that backed up to county land that was a nature preserve. His backyard was basically non-existent, but he didn't mind as he got to look out over the preserve. However, he did marvel at how his next-door neighbor's backyard extended a good 8 feet past his, giving neighbor a nice space back there. Gramps tried to be friendly with all his new neighbors, exchanging phone numbers and the like. And one day, he noticed the next-door neighbor was putting down expensive pavers that extended from his back door all the way to the old fence posts that designated the preserve boundary. Gramps watched the neighbor yank the 3 rickety fence posts out of the ground and move them back an extra feet into the preserve before pounding them back in, then started to clear the land, intending to gain himself more area for his pavers. Gramps used to work for the National Park Services as a young lad, so he thought he had better warn his neighbor of the consequences of his actions. So he heads out back for a little chat. Neighbor is immediately defensive, and before Gramps says much, neighbor tells him, "You're new here, I've been here 10 years, and to mind your own darn business." Gramps decides not to press the issue. Nothing happens that year, but the following year, when most of the park emptied out to head north for the summer, the county comes by to check on the preserve. Gramps notices them going back and forth behind his neighbor's house. The workers are pulling out maps and taking photos and making phone calls, and soon more guys show up. Turns out neighbor has moved the posts several times over the years, and in reality his backyard is supposed to be even smaller than Gramps' backyard. To make it worse, neighbor put pavers in the back, specifically to park both his golf cart and a cherry red sports car back there for the summer. So the county will have to move them before they can do anything else. They tape a notice to the front door and leave. Gramps goes over to read it, and it states that neighbor was in violation of encroaching onto protected lands. He has 30 days to move his car, tear up the pavers, and pay a fine of $11,000. Failure to do so within 30 days will result in golf cart and car being towed and impounded. Pavers will be dug up and carted off at neighbor's expense, and the fine will increase for every additional day. past the deadline. 30 days comes and goes. So a week after that, Gramps has quite the show. As first the car and cart were towed, pavers were dug up and hauled off, and the old fence posts and ropes were replaced with metal posts, embedded into buried cement bases, connected by steel cables. Whole process took several weeks to finish, but the preserve looked a lot more legit. When they were done, a few solar cameras were installed, so the county could monitor the wildlife remotely. Meanwhile, more notices were taped to the front door of neighbor's house. By November, the snowbirds were flooding back into the park, including Neighbor. That was Gramps' second show of the summer, as Neighbor reads all the notices, digging down until he reads the first one, then runs out back and starts screaming and cussing up a storm before running back to his car to dig out his cell phone so he can call the county to find out where his car and golf cart were. Gramps stays indoors to avoid the guy as he is frantically trying to unload his car, turn on his water and electricity, get the AC and the toilets going, and all the while trying to get someone at county to pick up the phone and give him some answers. He finally gets a live person and proceeds to scream at them while on speakerphone about his car and cart. So the call keeps getting kicked to other people, because who wants to help a screamer? Basically, Neighbor is told to come to the county office to get this straightened out. 3 days later, Neighbor catches Gramps outside and asks if he was here when the county stole his car and destroyed his backyard. Gramps said he was, and Neighbor says, "Well, why didn't you call me when you saw them putting notices on my door? You had my number up north." Gramps said he had thought about doing that, but figured Neighbor would prefer him to mind his own darn business. So he decided against it. On to the final story shared by you/ComMomCG. I will be playing this in front of the whole class, lol. Okay. I was talking to some friends from undergrad, and this story from my freshman year came up again. Second semester of my freshman year, I was taking a music theory course. The professor was very serious about her job, and this class was a bit of a weed-out class for students who wanted to pursue music education. By the time the end of the semester rolled around, I got the feeling she didn't really like me much, because I didn't pay attention in class, but still got us on the homework, exams, playing tests, so she couldn't really punish me for anything, since I wasn't disrupting the class, but was just a thorn in her side through lack of participation. Our final project was to find a poem we liked and craft a song using the poem as the lyrics. As she passes out the requirement sheet, she announced that she would be playing these for the class, so we need to put in effort so that we don't feel embarrassed by what she plays in front of everyone. She shoots a glance at me, the least involved student, as she says that, which I took as a challenge. I found a poem called A Minor Bird and decided to craft my masterpiece in the key of E-flat minor. The reasoning: 6 of the 7 notes are lowered a half step, so it's not a matter of thinking everything I see is lowered. It's everything but one note is lowered, which is fairly hard to keep track of while sight reading something that utilizes both hands on the piano. We were to hand them in at the beginning of class, and she would go through the stack and play them without practicing first. It's a freshman level class. How hard could it be? I spent weeks working on this because I wanted to make sure it was both well written and an absolute bomb to play. I had upperclassmen take a look at it to make sure everything was labeled correctly, and they told me I was the most magnificent bastard ever, because this professor had irked most of the students in the department who had taken her class. Then the day comes. We all turn our papers in, and I'm visibly excited by everything. The professor comes in and goes full Dolores Umbridge. I certainly hope everyone met the requirements and put care into their work. If not, we'll soon find out. Goes to the piano and pulls the first paper off of the stack and makes some comments about it that aren't negative, but are a bit goading regarding the amount of effort it seemed to take to write it. She pulls mine up about 2/3 of the way, sits down to play it, and stops at the first chord. She looks around, makes eye contact with me, and straight up glares before regaining her composure and plunking through my piece. There's several chords that make a nice crunch before she corrects herself, and it sounds like whoever wrote this piece did a crappy job because of how it sounded. At the end, the meek international student, who has perfect pitch, raises her hand and goes, "Excuse me, doctor, that piece just played It has 6 flats in the key, yes. Professor, yes, it did. I didn't quite expect that. Student, you didn't play all 6 flats. It didn't sound. Professor turns, glares at me, and goes no, I did not. Got a 97%, because she marked a chord label incorrect. Went back in and showed her that she missed the not flat note in the chord and that it was actually labeled correctly. Got it changed to a 100%. TLDR music professor threatened to play our pieces in front of us, so we would work harder on it. I wrote something she didn't play. FYI, unfortunately, I have no idea where the sheet music is at this point. That class was spring 9, and I've had a lot of life happen since then. The sheet music is definitely not on my current computer. That's it for the video, thanks for watching.